We have all sometime or the other encountered government agencies. Be it for development, research, or general day-to-day functions, government agencies are responsible for ensuring that the taxes we pay are put to good use. But that does not mean that there aren't some very weird government agencies out there. Let's take a look at some of them. Number 16. Japan. Aliens have often interested us. Any mention of a visit from outer space is enough to get our brains whirring with excitement. And with so many claims of alien abduction and UFO sightings all over the world, it really comes as not too much of a surprise that France has actually set up an agency to study UFOs. Called the Group for Study and Information on Unidentified Aerospatial Phenomenon, or GPAN, it was established in 1977 as a unit of CNES, which is basically the French NASA. In 2007, the agency released many of the files it was working on, and they revealed that while most were hoaxes, some sightings did indeed have some substance. Number 15. Beijing Weather Modification Center. When it comes to weather, most of us are happy with the fact that God controls it. But apparently no one told the Chinese this, and they came up with a weather modification center. Their purpose? To control the weather, specifically rain. How they do it is by firing crystals into the clouds to induce rainfall artificially. During the Beijing Olympics, they were very active, with 32,000 staff members firing cloud-forming rockets near the venues. And in another weird case, they were apparently responsible for inducing a rare and heavy snowfall in Beijing by firing silver iodide into the clouds. Guess no sacrifices to the rain gods are needed anymore. Number 14. Shanghai Commission for the Management of Language Use. Chinese is a pretty tough language. Any of us who've ever encountered it know that it's pretty complex, and we end up using translating tools to help us understand it. But that does lead to some very hilarious results. So much so that an unofficial language called Chinglish was born for the English-speaking population of China to laugh about, like when they visit a bank and see cash recycling machine. Thus, the Shanghai Commission for the Management of Language Use was set up by the government to ensure that these mistakes do not happen. Their purpose is to basically eradicate Chinglish and properly translate all signs and menus in restaurants. But to tell you the truth, a chuckle over urine district sign was kind of a better deal. Number 13. Ministry of Unification. The partition of Korea into North and South has created bitter enemies of the two. But it does not mean that they do not hold hope to be reunited one day. In fact, so strong is the belief that the Constitution of South Korea demands that it seeks reunification with the North. And they've even set up an entire Ministry of Unification for the same purpose. The main role of the ministry is to educate the people about the benefits of reuniting with the North and making useful policies which help to make the process easier. And not just South Korea, even North Korea has a committee for the peaceful reunification of the fatherland for the same reasons. Let's hope these ministries are successful, and we'll see one Korea once again. Number 12. The US Postal Inspection Service. Getting mail and not electronic letters used to be a pretty big deal, which obviously made the Postal Service a very reputed and reliable name. But then, people started running Ponzi schemes in its name. So what did the government do? They set up the US Postal Inspection Service, whose purpose was to crack down on crimes that would affect or wrongly use the postal department. And they're not just an organization in name either. They have over 1,500 agents and take their job very seriously. So next time you try and mess with the Postal Service, watch out for them. Number 11. Office of Planetary Protection. Is there life out there in the universe? There has been no solid evidence so far, but that's not stopped NASA from preparing for it. To the extent that they have formed the Office of Planetary Protection, whose job is to ensure that aliens do not contaminate Earth, and vice versa. The officers of Planetary Protection are also responsible for developing sterile spacecrafts and deciding flight paths. And what's even more surprising is that NASA is not the only one to have such a committee. Most countries with a space program have had one at some point or the other. But NASA and the ESA, European Space Agency, are the only ones to have a full-time office. Number 10. Board of Tea Experts. Tea is apparently a much bigger thing in the USA than we thought possible. Why? Because in 1897, they passed a Tea Importation Act, under which it was stipulated that all tea imported into the USA would have to be tasted to ensure that it met the standards. So a tea board was established, which consisted basically of 7 men who met twice a year to drink different types of tea, to determine which ones would be allowed in the US. And if your tea was rejected, you could apply again, of course. However, in 1996, the Tea Importation Act was repealed, as the government thought that they could hold tea at different standards than other food items. But it did exist, and had an awesome job to offer 7 men. Number 9. Office of Yeoman Warders. When the Tower of London was built in the 11th century, it was basically a prison. Since then, it has become a major tourist attraction, and the Yeoman Warders are the ones who have traditionally served as its guards. So, they have the Office of the Yeoman Warders. One of the wards is actually a raven master who is responsible for maintaining ravens there. Apparently, King Charles II made it mandatory in a decree that 6 ravens be maintained at all times. Number 8. The US Board on Geographic Names. Names usually hold a lot of power, which is why locals probably get offended when you use the name of their town wrong. So much so that the government came up with an agency just to deal with it. So if you ever see the name of a place written wrongly on a map, call them up and get it corrected. Number 7. Office of the Swan Marker and Office of the Swan Warden. Now, there are already agencies and NGOs who work towards the welfare of animals, so why does the swan need a special office? Apparently because in the 12th century, the British Crown made all the swans around the Thames River exclusive for consumption by the Crown, so they created an Office of the Keeper of the Swan, which split in 1993 into the Office of the Swan Marker and the Office of the Swan Warden. Thankfully, they are now more concerned with preserving the swans rather than eating them, and the swans are regularly counted, tagged, and checked for diseases now. Number 6. Committee for the Promotion of Virtue and Prevention of Vice. Well, if all you had to do was think of this committee's name before committing any crime, you would probably lose the gumption in all that time spent. But still, the Saudi Arabia government decided to get this agency together to see to it that no one sells or takes alcohol and drugs. Women are properly dressed, men go to mosques, and even that pets are not paraded in public. Not to mention witchcraft. In fact, this is not just a shadow agency just for the heck of it, and enjoys some real power in Saudi Arabia. However, much of its power was taken away when it stopped the rescue of girls in a school fire, because they thought that they might not be covered properly. Oh brother. Number 5. Mutilated Currency Division. So what do you do when your beautiful, crisp money gets damaged? Simple. Send it to the Mutilated Currency Division of the US to get a refund. Yes, the US actually has a government agency which is responsible for exchanging mutilated notes. And they are pretty busy, giving out almost $30 million in reimbursements every year. Their only condition? That at least half of the note should be present. Don't worry though, if they think that more than half has been destroyed, then they will still send a refund. So effective are they that they once refunded a farmer $600 when he discovered that his cow ate it, and he sent its stomach to them. But hey, they only handle notes, so if you got some damaged coins, they won't be able to help. Number 4. The Office of Professional Responsibility. While we all know that there are ethics whenever we take up a job, lawyers are generally the ones who need it the most, and while private firms usually have a strict code and stricter punishments, government lawyers generally get free rein, or at least that's what the US government thought. So they devised the Office of Professional Responsibility, whose job is to ensure that lawyers who work for the government stick to the ethical standards set forth by the US Constitution. Number 3. Bureau of Outdoor Recreation. With the invention of mobile phones, PlayStations, and other indoor pleasures, many people are ignoring the outdoors. So much so that the US government came up with a Bureau of Outdoor Recreation, whose responsibility is to ensure that people make the most of the fresh air. And while the Bureau has been merged with the National Park Service, it did create the Alaska Paddle Guide. Number 2. The Backward Classes Bureau. Well, considering that over half the population of India falls under that category, it's really not that surprising. But they still could have come up with a less demeaning name. And their main role is to oversee which communities come up under this category and which does not. And what's more is that this committee is mandatory according to the Indian Constitution, and they have been around since 1953. Although, if they haven't been able to get the backward class up to normal class yet, they really should be doing things differently. Number 1. The US Grazing Service. cattle graze, and there's not much anyone can do about it. But in the 1930s, it got so out of hand that 2/3 of the publicly owned grazing lands saw a drop in productivity. So the government set up the U.S. Grazing Service to keep this in check. However, the agency was a badly funded one, and it was soon scrapped and merged into the General Land Office by 1946. Have you ever had a run-in with any of these strange government agencies? If so, let us know in the comments below, and remember to subscribe to our channel for free to get updates on our latest videos.